My name is Ari Ropo. I am Professor of Management and Organization at the Faculty of Management, University of Tampere, Finland. Well, really depending on what kind of thinking you are inclined to, you can find leadership as a heroic kind of great man show, or you can also see it as a collective activity. And I have to say that unfortunately, this heroic way of looking at leadership and seeing leadership as heroic actions is more like a mainstream thinking. It has to do with leader traits and characteristics and behaviors, leadership styles, but it's always seen as an individually centered phenomenon. On the contrary to the kind of more recent developments in the leadership field, where more collective ways, shared ways of leading has been recognized. You can basically think that leadership in the plural means that leadership is not the kind of monopoly of one person who has a kind of leadership role or formal position, but it is more in the possession of collective people in collective settings. You can actually find plural leadership in two different ways. At least two different ways. You can think of plural leadership as sharing leadership responsibilities and leadership functions among a number of people. And they don't need to be formally in formal positions. Or you can think it more as a cultural phenomenon, meaning that people will be working together in very mundane interactions to find their direction and find their own ways of doing things. It's more like doing things together and not so much like delegating sort of typical leadership functions. If you think of plural leadership through this concept of delegation, so that people would just share different leader functions and leader responsibilities, that would be like, I would compare it like slicing a pie and giving one slice to you, and I can take this slice. That's this kind of delegated leadership. But then, if you think of this plural leadership as a more cultural thing, and one might compare it to making the pie, so that there needs to be a lot of negotiation, a lot of listening to each other, being very sensitive to other people's feelings, and knowing and putting all kinds of ingredients together, and also sort of sensing the temperatures and kind of human climate, and that makes those two kinds of plural leadership very different. And I think everybody can imagine that slicing a pie is so much easier than making the pie. it's kind of challenging because it calls for recognizing that also power and responsibilities can be shared, so that you don't have to have somebody out there to tell you what to do, but to take your own action, your own initiative. So you're not just waiting like this and thinking that someone knows better. When you think leadership as a mundane action, mundane interaction among people, it also entails the idea that it's an emerging process. It's an emerging process, and you don't necessarily, or nobody necessarily knows the outcome. So it is just something working together by speaking, relating to people, and developing the kind of collective routines. And one can actually even say that leadership it's a kind of rhizomatic process, so that there are no specific individual leaders, but actually everybody is doing leadership. But it's very mundane. It's not anything heroic. It's just like working together, doing things together, and in that way, leadership is not something out there, and it's not about subject-object relationships, but everybody is actually a subject. The issue of rhizomatic leadership, it has sort of appeared in the current social movements or uprisings like the Arab Spring and Gezi Park and that sort of things happening in our world at the moment. And one of the perspectives in terms of leadership is that those kind of movements, they don't actually have a specific designated leader, but it's more like a collective action. It's sort of growing, emerging and growing, and people are sort of finding like-minded people and doing things together. And rhizomatic, it means that there are actually very many leaders. When thinking of rhizomatic and leadership together, it's one can actually say that it's almost like a contagious disease. So people are doing things together, having same type of goals, and it's emerging practices. It might be, when we think of these social movements, it might be very material in a sense that people have banners and they have T-shirts and all kinds of materials to sort of symbolize that, hey, we are doing this together. Well, we can all be leaders by being very alert to what's happening around us and being perceptive, being active, looking for like-minded people and doing things together. And it cannot be very, these kind of things they are not very much pre-planned. They just happen. And that's why the outcome is also not known. And this is something that's very untypical when thinking of leadership.